Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine when walking past an abandoned building? That sensation that something is watching you from behind crumbling walls and shattered windows. What if I told you that those feelings aren't just your imagination, but warnings from the past? Warnings about horrors that some have tried to bury but can never truly be forgotten. Before you continue watching this video, take a moment to comment where you're watching from. Your support helps this channel continue to uncover these hidden histories that powerful forces would rather keep in the shadows. Please subscribe if you haven't already. We need your help to keep bringing these dark truths to light. In the sweltering summer of 1871, as Mississippi struggled to rebuild in the aftermath of the Civil War, a discovery was made in the small town of Coldwater that would haunt the region for generations to come. The Hargrove Cotton Mill, once the economic centerpiece of Tate County, had stood abandoned since 1868, following a series of unexplained accidents that claimed the lives of 7 workers. Local businessman Joseph Whitfield purchased the property at auction, with plans to restore the mill to its former glory and revitalize the town's struggling economy. On July 7, 1871, Whitfield arrived with a crew of 12 men to begin clearing debris and assessing the structural integrity of the building. What they discovered beneath the warped floorboards of the mill's eastern wing would become one of the most disturbing cases in Mississippi's history, one that official records would later attempt to erase. "We were pulling up the damaged boards near what used to be the carding room," recalled Thomas Mercer, the foreman of the restoration crew, in a statement to the Coldwater Gazette on July 10th. "The wood was rotted something terrible, and there was this smell, not like regular rot or mildew, something sickly sweet underneath, like flowers gone bad. Jenkins thought maybe there was a dead animal caught under there, so he grabbed a lantern and took a look. What Jenkins discovered wasn't a dead animal. It was a hidden chamber approximately 15 feet square, dug beneath the mill floor, and inside were the remains of 2 young women, estimated to be in their early 20s, seated across from each other in wooden chairs that had been bolted to the earthen floor. Their wrists and ankles were bound with iron shackles connected to chains that disappeared into the dirt walls. Most disturbing, according to Mercer's account, was that the women appeared to have been deliberately positioned to face one another, their chairs placed exactly 7 feet apart. Between them sat a small wooden table holding a single oil lamp that had long since burned out, and an open Bible turned to the Book of Revelation. "They didn't look like they'd been dead long," Mercer continued in his statement. "That's what didn't make no sense at all. The mill had been closed near 3 years, but these gals looked like they'd only been there a few weeks. No real decay to speak of. And identical as 2 peas in a pod they were, same face, same hair, even wearing the same gray dresses." Local authorities were immediately summoned, and County Sheriff Elijah Browning took charge of the investigation. The bodies were removed from the chamber and transported to the office of Dr. Samuel Lattimore, the town's physician, for examination. It was at this point that the case took an even stranger turn. Dr. Lattimore's initial report, dated July 8th, contained observations that would later be struck from official records. The deceased appear to be identical twin females, approximately 20 to 22 years of age. Time of death difficult to establish due to unusual state of preservation. Despite the confined space and summer temperatures, minimal decomposition is evident. Both subjects exhibit what appear to be ritual markings carved into their forearms, identical patterns of interlocking circles and symbols I cannot identify from any known religious or cultural tradition. Most notably, neither body bears any obvious cause of death. No signs of trauma, asphyxiation, or poisoning are immediately apparent. I have taken blood and tissue samples for further analysis. The following morning, Lattimore sent an urgent message to Sheriff Browning requesting his immediate presence. When the sheriff arrived at the physician's office, he found Lattimore in a state of considerable distress. "They're gone," Lattimore reportedly told Browning. "I locked the examination room myself last night. The key never left my possession. But when I opened it this morning, the bodies were missing." A thorough search of the premises revealed no signs of forced entry or exit. The only potential evidence was discovered by Browning himself, a small puddle of water on the floor beneath the examination table where one of the bodies had been placed, and a series of damp footprints leading toward the wall. The footprints simply ended at the solid wall, as if whoever or whatever had made them had walked straight through the plaster and wood. As news of the discovery and subsequent disappearance spread through Coldwater, older residents began to share whispered stories about the mill's troubled history. Construction of the Hargrove cotton mill had begun in 1852 under the direction of Ambrose Hargrove, a wealthy planter who sought to expand his business interests beyond his extensive cotton fields. The mill was completed in 1854 and quickly became the largest employer in the county. From the beginning, however, the mill seemed plagued by misfortune. Machines broke down with unusual frequency. Minor fires erupted without clear cause. And most troubling, workers reported strange occurrences, tools moving on their own, voices whispering from empty rooms, and a persistent feeling of being watched. These accounts might have been dismissed as mere superstition, if not for what happened on November 12, 1857. According to records from the Tate County Historical Society, 2 young women arrived in Coldwater that day, seeking employment at the mill. They gave their names as Eleanor and Elizabeth Thorne and claimed to be from New Orleans. The sisters were hired immediately by mill manager George Wilcox, who noted their identical appearance as a curiosity in his personal journal. "Hired twin sisters today," Wilcox wrote. "Peculiar girls but hard workers. Speak very little but understand instructions perfectly. Have the most unusual violet eyes I've ever seen. Assigned them to the spinning room where we've been shorthanded." Over the following weeks, Wilcox made several more entries regarding the sisters. November 20th. The Thorne girls continue to impress with their productivity. They work in perfect unison, never tiring, barely stopping even for meals. Other workers have begun to keep their distance, claiming the sisters make them uneasy. Nonsense, of course. Efficiency should be commended, not feared. December 3rd. Production has increased 15% since the Thorne sisters joined us. Remarkable. Yet I've noticed something odd. They never seem to leave the mill. Other workers report seeing lights in the spinning room at all hours. Must investigate whether they've taken to sleeping on the premises, which is strictly prohibited. December 10th. Confronted the Thorne sisters about living in the mill. They denied it but couldn't tell me where they're boarding in town. No one has rented rooms to them. Where do they go at night? When I pressed them on the matter, they simply smiled in that identical way of theirs and said, "We are where we need to be, Mr. Wilcox." Most unsettling. The final entry regarding the sisters came on December 21st. "Something is wrong with the Thorne girls. Found them this morning in the spinning room, standing motionless before a window, holding hands and whispering together in a language I couldn't recognize. When I entered, they stopped and turned to me in unison. Their eyes, I could swear their eyes had changed color from violet to the palest blue, like ice. Eleanor, or was it Elizabeth, said, 'The wheels are turning, Mr. Wilcox. Can you hear them?' The wheels of judgment turned for Hargrove. Then they smiled and returned to their work as if nothing had happened. I've sent for Mr. Hargrove. The sisters must be dismissed." Ambrose Hargrove arrived at the mill the following day, December 22nd. What transpired during his visit was not recorded by Wilcox, but town records indicate that the mill closed unexpectedly for 3 days afterward. When it reopened on December 26th, the Thorne sisters were no longer employed there. No record of their departure from Coldwater exists. When operations resumed, workers reported a change in the atmosphere of the mill. The strange occurrences had ceased, but many described a new heaviness in the air, a persistent chill in the spinning room despite the heat from the machinery, and an occasional whiff of that same sickly sweet odor that Whitfield's crew would detect 14 years later. For a time, the mill operated without incident. Then, in the early morning hours of February 3rd, 1858, a fire broke out in the main production floor. The blaze was contained before it could destroy the building, but 3 workers who had been completing a late shift were badly injured. All 3 reported the same disturbing detail. Just before the fire erupted, they had seen 2 identical female figures walking hand in hand across the production floor, their grey dresses glowing faintly in the darkness. Over the next decade, similar sightings occurred with increasing frequency. Always 2 women, always identical, always in grey dresses. They were seen standing motionless in corners, walking through walls, or simply staring out windows. Each sighting was typically followed by an accident or misfortune, machinery breaking down, workers falling ill, or small inexplicable fires. The most detailed account came from night watchman Frederick Doyle, who encountered the figures during his rounds on October 31st, 1867. "I was checking the locks on the east wing when I heard singing," Doyle later told the Coldwater Gazette. 2 women's voices, singing a lullaby I didn't recognize. followed the sound to the carding room and saw them there, two ladies in grey, sitting on the floor facing each other. Between them was what looked like a small doll made of cotton waste and scraps of fabric. They were rocking it like a baby while they sang. I called out, asking who they were and how they'd gotten in. They stopped singing and looked up at me together. Same movement, same expression. Their eyes weren't right. Too pale, too bright in the darkness. One of them said, "We're waiting for Mr. Hargrove to join us." The other one smiled and added, "He's coming soon." The wheels of judgment turn. Then they just weren't there anymore. Disappeared right before my eyes. 2 nights after Doyle's encounter, Ambrose Hargrove was found dead in his office at the mill. According to the coroner's report, he had suffered a massive apoplexy while working late. His body was discovered seated at his desk, his features frozen in an expression of terror, his hands clutching a half-written letter. The letter, which became part of Sheriff Browning's investigation in 1871, contained a partial confession. "I cannot bear this burden any longer. What we did to those girls was unconscionable, but we believed we had no choice. They were not what they claimed to be. The things they knew, the power they demonstrated. May God forgive me, but their influence was spreading among the other workers. When we discovered their true nature and intentions toward this town, toward the children especially, we had to act. Sealing them beneath the floor was Wilcox's idea. The ritual preparations came from that book of his, an ancient volume he claimed would contain and counteract their abilities. I was skeptical but desperate. We performed the rites as instructed, binding them to the chairs, placing them facing one another to create what Wilcox called a closed circuit of their power. The Bible between them was meant to serve as both conduit and constraint. Wilcox assured me they would weaken and eventually perish, their unnatural influence fading with them. But each night, I hear their singing beneath the floorboards. And now workers report seeing them walking the mill despite their bodies being chained below. God help me. I think we've only made them stronger. The barriers between worlds grow thin where they are concerned. I fear what will emerge if... The letter ended abruptly at this point, presumably interrupted by Hargrove's death. Following the tragedy, the mill passed to Hargrove's son, William, who attempted to continue operations. However, a series of accidents and unexplained deaths forced him to close the facility permanently in 1868. William Hargrove left Coldwater shortly thereafter, reportedly telling associates he could no longer bear to set foot in the building. Which brings us back to the summer of 1871 and Joseph Whitfield's ill-fated attempt to restore the mill. Following the disappearance of the sisters' bodies from Dr. Lattimore's examination room, Sheriff Browning expanded his investigation. He focused particularly on identifying the women and determining how they came to be imprisoned beneath the mill floor. Parish records yielded no information about the Thorne sisters' origins. No one in New Orleans recalled twins matching their description. It was as if they had simply appeared in Coldwater that November day in 1857, without past or connections. The investigation took a darker turn when Browning interviewed former mill manager George Wilcox, who was living in a small cabin on the outskirts of town. Once a respected figure in the community, Wilcox had become a recluse following the mill's closure. Neighbors described him as deeply paranoid, his cabin surrounded by strange symbols painted on trees and posts. Browning's notes from the interview, dated July 15, 1871, reveal a man consumed by fear. Wilcox appeared severely malnourished and sleep-deprived. His hands trembled constantly, and he repeatedly glanced at the windows and doors as we spoke. When questioned about the Thorne sisters, he became highly agitated. They were never sisters, he insisted. Never even human. We didn't understand what we were dealing with until it was too late. They looked identical not because they were twins, but because they were the same being in 2 bodies, or maybe 2 beings sharing one essence. I still don't know for certain. When pressed to explain the chamber beneath the mill and the circumstances of the women's imprisonment, Wilcox grew even more disturbed. The binding ritual was supposed to contain them, drain their power, he said. The positioning was crucial, facing each other 7 feet apart, the sacred text between them. The iron was forged with special materials, quenched in blessed water, everything according to the instructions. I asked him where these instructions had come from. Wilcox pointed to a small trunk in the corner of his cabin. Inside was a leather-bound volume titled Liber Umbrarum, Book of Shadows, which he claimed had been in his family for generations. The book contained detailed rituals for the containment of what it called twinned entities, beings that manifest in dual forms. "We thought we had succeeded," Wilcox continued. "For months after we sealed them away, the mill prospered. The disturbances ceased, but then workers began seeing them again, walking the floors at night despite their bodies being chained below. And the dreams began. Everyone connected to the ritual started having the same dream of two girls singing to a cotton doll, promising that we would all join them soon." Wilcox then showed me his forearms, which were covered in scars forming patterns similar to those Dr. Latimore had observed on the bodies. "They marked me from a distance," he whispered. "Each night, a new cut appears. The pattern grows. When it's complete, they'll come for me as they came for Hargrove." When I suggested he leave Coldwater for his safety, Wilcox laughed bitterly. "There's nowhere far enough," he said. "Distance means nothing to them. Those who helped chain them are bound to them now." Hargrove discovered that when he fled to Memphis, they found him in his hotel room surrounded by cotton that no one could explain. Before I departed, Wilcox pressed a small cloth bag into my hand. It contained salt, mixed with what he claimed were iron filings from the original chains. "Keep this with you," he urged. "It won't save you, but it might slow them when they come." 3 days after this interview, on July 18th, George Wilcox was found dead in his cabin. Like Ambrose Hargrove before him, he appeared to have died of natural causes, a stroke, according to Dr. Latimore. But the condition of the body and the scene troubled those who discovered it. Wilcox was found seated in a wooden chair in the center of a circle of salt. His eyes were open wide, his expression one of abject terror. Most disturbing were his arms, which now bore completed versions of the strange symbolic patterns. The final cuts appeared to have been made shortly before his death, as they were still seeping blood when the body was discovered. Written on the wall in what was confirmed to be Wilcox's own blood was a message: "The wheel turns." Sheriff Browning's investigation continued, but with increasingly diminishing returns. One by one, those connected to either the original imprisonment of the sisters or the recent discovery of their remains reported strange experiences: singing voices at night, glimpses of grey-clad figures at windows, and dreams of two women beckoning them to join the circle. By August of 1871, Browning himself had begun to exhibit signs of severe strain. His notes became increasingly disjointed, filled with references to being watched and followed. On August 7th, he wrote, "Saw them again last night standing at the foot of my bed, identical down to the smallest detail, even the way they tilt their heads when they smile. They spoke in unison, asking if I could hear the wheel turning. Said soon it would complete another revolution. When I reached for my revolver, they vanished, but the room filled with the scent of cotton blossoms and decay. The pattern has begun on my arm as well. Just a small cut at first appeared while I slept. Now it grows each night. Wilcox was right about everything. We've uncovered something that should have remained buried. Sealing the chamber again won't help. They're no longer bound to their physical forms if they ever truly were. The mill must be destroyed completely. Fire seems the only answer according to Wilcox's book, but not ordinary fire. The flames must be consecrated, the ground afterwards sown with salt and iron." On August 12, 1871, the Hargrove cotton mill burned to the ground. Sheriff Browning was seen by multiple witnesses entering the building shortly before the blaze began. He emerged some 20 minutes later. As the first flames became visible, his expression described by witnesses as eerily calm. When questioned about his actions, Browning reportedly said only, "It's done. The wheel is broken." He refused to elaborate further and submitted his resignation as sheriff the following day. Within a week, he had sold his property and left Coldwater. His subsequent whereabouts and fate remained unknown until 1893, when a man matching his description died in an asylum in St. Louis, still reportedly haunted by visions of identical twin women who whispered to him from the shadows. In the aftermath of the fire, Joseph Whitfield abandoned his plans to restore the mill. The land remained vacant, with locals refusing to approach it even in daylight. Over time, nature reclaimed the ruins, and the story of the Thorne sisters faded into local legend. But the case was far from over. In 1882, 11 years after the mill fire, a series of unusual deaths occurred in Tate County. The victims, 7 in total, shared no obvious connection except one. They were all descendants of men who had worked at the Hargrove Mill during the period when the Thorne sisters were employed there. Each victim was found seated in a wooden chair, positioned facing an empty second chair exactly 7 feet away. Each bore the now familiar pattern of cuts on their forearms, and each died of apparently natural causes, despite being in good health prior to their deaths. The last victim, Matthew Jenkins, grandson of Thomas Jenkins, who had first discovered the hidden chamber, was found clutching a cotton doll. Stitched into the doll's chest was a message: "The wheel still turns." Authorities attempted to suppress information about these deaths to prevent panic, but word spread nonetheless. Many families with connections to the old mill left the area. Those who remained reported occasional sightings of 2 identical women in grey dresses, often near bodies of water or cotton fields, always watching, always smiling their peculiar mirrored smiles. The most significant development came in 1900, when construction began on a new textile factory near the site of the former mill. During excavation, workers discovered a small underground chamber that had somehow survived the fire. Inside were 2 wooden chairs, badly charred but still recognizable, positioned facing each other. Between them lay the remains of a Bible, its pages turned to ash except for a single intact leaf from the Book of Revelation. More disturbing was what the workers found carved into the earthen walls, hundreds of names arranged in concentric circles. Some were recognized as belonging to people connected to the original mill. Others were unfamiliar, and many appeared to have been added after the chamber had supposedly been sealed. Most troubling were the names that had not yet been carved, but rather written in what appeared to be fresh clay, names of living residents of Coldwater and neighboring towns. Construction was immediately halted, and local ministers were brought in to bless the site. The chamber was filled with concrete, and the partially completed factory demolished. The land was declared unsuitable for development, and eventually converted into a cemetery. As one minister suggested, hallowed ground might be the only thing capable of containing whatever lingered there. Yet even this precaution proved insufficient. Over the decades that followed, Coldwater experienced periods of relative calm, punctuated by clusters of inexplicable events, usually 7 incidents spread over 7 days, occurring every 7 years. Missing persons, unexplained deaths. Children reporting conversations with the Grey Ladies, who told them secrets about their families that no stranger could have known. Each cycle culminated in the discovery of a cotton doll in the old cemetery, always with a new message stitched into it. The wheel turns. Another revolution complete. 7 times 7 approaches. The most recent cycle began in 2015, exactly 7 times 7 years since the mill fire. The incidents followed the established pattern, but with an escalation in frequency and intensity. Sightings of the grey-clad twins were reported not just in Coldwater, but in towns across northern Mississippi, always near cotton fields, always watching, always with their identical smiles. In the early hours of July 7th, 2015, 144 years to the day since Joseph Whitfield's crew discovered the hidden chamber, a groundskeeper at the old cemetery reported a strange phenomenon. The ground above the site of the former mill appeared to be breathing, rising and falling like a sleeping chest. As he watched, the earth bulged upward, splitting to reveal a darkness deeper than night. From this opening came the sound of 2 women singing in perfect unison, a lullaby in a language the groundskeeper couldn't identify. By the time authorities arrived, the opening had sealed itself, leaving only a circular pattern of disturbed earth. At the center lay a cotton doll with a message stitched in red thread: "The final revolution begins." In the 7 years since that incident, the pattern of strange occurrences has accelerated beyond the traditional cycle. Sightings are no longer limited to northern Mississippi, but have been reported across the American South, always in communities with historical ties to cotton production. Always 2 identical women in grey dresses, watching, smiling, sometimes singing their strange lullaby. The most recent development came just last month, when a construction crew in Memphis uncovered a previously unknown basement chamber beneath the site of a hotel that had been demolished. The hotel had been built in 1859 on the property where Ambrose Hargrove allegedly fled before his death. Inside the chamber were 2 wooden chairs facing each other, 7 feet apart. Between them lay a cotton doll and a handwritten note that simply read, 7 times 7 times 7. The wheel completes its turn. Experts who examined the chamber estimated it had been sealed for well over a century, yet the note appeared to have been written recently. The ink was fresh. The paper showed no signs of aging. Most disturbing of all, a name was found carved into each chair. One read, Eleanor, the other, Elizabeth, and beneath each name was a date, October 27th, 2025, today. As night falls across the Mississippi Delta, those familiar with the legend of the Thorne sisters are keeping their doors locked and their lights burning. Cotton fields stand empty, harvesters idle. No one wants to be caught outside after dark, where two pale faces might be watching from between the rows, their identical smiles promising that the wheel of judgment continues to turn. Some in Coldwater say the sisters were merely unfortunate victims of superstition and cruelty, their spirits unable to rest due to the injustice done to them. Others maintain that George Wilcox was right, that whatever was chained beneath the mill floor was never human to begin with, merely wearing human form to move among us. Whatever the truth, one question remains for those who know the story. When the wheel completes its final turn tonight, who will be called to account? And will the circle of names carved in that earthen chamber finally be complete? In these uncertain times, many in northern Mississippi have turned to prayer for protection, believing that faith might shield them from whatever judgment the Thorne sisters seek to deliver. Churches throughout the region are holding vigils tonight, their doors open to all who seek sanctuary. As one local pastor put it, we don't know if these events are supernatural or merely the work of troubled minds keeping an old legend alive. But we do know that in times of fear, faith provides comfort and community provides strength. Whether the threat is spiritual or physical or merely imagined, we face it better together in the light than alone in darkness. Remember, as you continue your day after watching this video, that some legends persist because they contain kernels of truth. Some buildings stand empty because they hold secrets better left undisturbed. And sometimes, that strange sensation of being watched is more than just your imagination. May God protect you, and may Jesus Christ guide your path away from darkness. Stay safe, and remember, the wheel is always turning. The legend of the Thorne sisters might have remained a regional curiosity, whispered only in Coldwater and surrounding communities, if not for what happened in the spring of 2022. A graduate student named Melissa Calloway from Ole Miss arrived in Tate County researching her doctoral thesis on textile industry labor conditions in the post-Civil War South. She had no knowledge of the Thorne sisters or the Hargrove Mill's dark history when she began searching county archives for information. What she found, and what subsequently happened to her, would thrust the forgotten legend back into public consciousness and raise disturbing questions about how far its influence had truly spread. I was going through property records from the 1870s when I first saw mention of the Hargrove Mill, Calloway wrote in her research journal on April 3rd. Nothing unusual, just ownership transfers and tax assessments. But I kept finding redactions in related documents, entire sections blacked out or pages removed entirely. When I asked the county clerk about these omissions, she became visibly uncomfortable and suggested I focus my research elsewhere. Calloway's curiosity was naturally piqued by this response. Rather than abandoning the subject, she intensified her search, expanding to newspaper archives, personal correspondence collections, and church records from the period. The pattern of redactions and missing information continued, forming what she described as a conspiracy of silence spanning generations. Through persistent investigation, Calloway eventually made contact with Eleanor Prentice, an elderly resident of Coldwater, whose great-grandfather had been part of Sheriff Browning's investigation in 1871. Prentice possessed a collection of family papers, including copies of documents that had been purged from official records, among them the complete text of Ambrose Hargrove's interrupted letter and detailed notes from Dr. Lattimore's examination of the sisters' bodies. On April 21st, Calloway recorded her meeting with Prentice, Mrs. Prentice was initially reluctant to discuss the Thorne sisters, but eventually revealed that knowledge of their story has been passed down through certain families in Coldwater for generations. She showed me a small cotton doll that has been in her family since 1871, supposedly the same one mentioned in Sheriff Browning's notes. The doll's features are crude but distinct, two identical female faces on opposite sides of the same head. Most disturbing was what Mrs. Prentice told me about local protective rituals. Descendants of families connected to the mill still place iron filings and salt across their thresholds on certain dates. They avoid being near cotton fields after dark, and they never, under any circumstances, speak the names Eleanor and Elizabeth together in the same breath. Names have power, Mrs. Prentice told me. Speak them together, and they hear you. They find you. Despite these warnings, Calloway continued her research. On May 7th, she visited the site of the old mill, now part of the cemetery grounds. In her final journal entry dated May 8th, she described a strange experience. Spent yesterday afternoon at the cemetery where the mill once stood. Nothing remarkable about the location, just overgrown grass and a few scattered headstones from the early 1900s. But as evening approached, I noticed something odd. The air above a particular patch of ground seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from pavement in summer, though the day was cool. As I watched, the shimmering intensified. Within it, I could almost make out two faces, identical women's faces, watching me with pale eyes. I felt lightheaded suddenly, and there was a sweet, cloying smell in the air. The next thing I clearly remember is finding myself seated on the ground, facing an empty space about 7 feet away, as if something should have been there opposite me. The sun had fully set, though I'd arrived in early afternoon. Somehow, hours had passed without my awareness. Looking down, I noticed marks on my forearm. Not cuts exactly, but reddened skin in a pattern of interlocking circles. The pattern is faint now in the morning light, but still visible. It seems to be spreading slowly outward from a central point. I've photographed the marking and am attaching the image to this entry. If anything happens to me, this journal should provide context for understanding why. I'm not superstitious by nature, but I can't shake the feeling that by pursuing this research, I've drawn attention I shouldn't have. The sisters are watching me now. I feel their eyes even as I write these words. This was the last entry in Calloway's journal. She failed to attend a scheduled meeting with her thesis advisor the following day. When campus police conducted a welfare check at her apartment, they found it empty, with no signs of disturbance or packing. Her laptop remained on her desk, her journal beside it open to the final entry. The attached photograph showed her arm with a faint but distinct pattern matching the descriptions from 1871. The search for Melissa Calloway continued for weeks, eventually involving state police and FBI resources. The case attracted national media attention, particularly after journalists discovered the historical connection to the Thorne sisters legend. Several true crime podcasts produced episodes about the disappearance, spreading awareness of the story far beyond Mississippi. On June 7th, exactly 1 month after her disappearance, Calloway was found seated on a bench in the Coldwater Cemetery, apparently in good health, but with no memory of the intervening weeks. The pattern on her arm had disappeared. When questioned about where she had been, she repeated only one phrase: "The wheel turns." "They're looking for the 7th of the 7th of the 7th. After extensive medical and psychological evaluation, Calloway was released to the care of her family. She abandoned her doctoral research and refused all interview requests. According to those close to her, she destroyed all her notes on the Thorne sisters and never spoke of them again. She reportedly moved to the Pacific Northwest, as far from Mississippi cotton country as possible within the continental United States. In the wake of the Calloway incident, interest in the Thorne sisters surged. Amateur historians, paranormal investigators, and curiosity seekers descended on Coldwater. Local authorities, concerned about trespassers at the cemetery and disruption to the community, attempted to downplay the story as mere folklore, but their efforts were undermined by a series of strange incidents that summer, all conforming to the established pattern. 7 residents of Tate County reported encounters with identical twin women in gray dresses, always near cotton fields or bodies of water. 7 households discovered cotton dolls on their porches, each with different messages stitched into them. The circle widens. 7 times 7 approaches. The debt remains unpaid. Perhaps most disturbing was what happened to journalist Carter Reynolds, who had traveled to Coldwater to report on the phenomenon for a national news magazine. On July 7th, the anniversary of the original discovery beneath the mill floor, Reynolds ventured alone to the cemetery at dusk, planning to live stream from the site. The stream began normally, with Reynolds providing historical context about the location. About 12 minutes in, viewers noticed a change in his demeanor. He stopped mid-sentence, staring at something off-camera. Although nothing unusual was visible in the frame, Reynolds began backing away, his expression shifting from confusion to terror. "They're here," he whispered. "Both of them, on either side of me." The camera panned wildly as he turned, showing only empty cemetery grounds. Then the image stabilized again as Reynolds continued, his voice now eerily calm. "They're speaking to me. They want me to share a message." For the next 3 minutes, Reynolds stood motionless, staring directly into the camera. When he spoke again, his voice had changed subtly, higher, with an unusual cadence, as if he were reciting something. "The wheel of judgment turns. 7 times 7 cycles since we were bound beneath the wood and iron. 6 complete. 1 final turn approaches. On that day, the circle will close. Those who bear the mark of complicity unto the 7th generation will answer for the sins of their fathers. The daughters of cotton and dust will have their accounting." The live stream abruptly ended after this message, when police arrived at the cemetery 30 minutes later, responding to concerned calls from viewers. They found Reynolds unconscious on the ground. Like Calloway before him, he had no memory of the event when he awoke. Unlike her, he did not emerge unscathed. A pattern of interlocking circles had been cut into his forearm, the wounds precise and bloodless, as if carved with surgical instruments. Reynolds recovered physically, but suffered persistent psychological effects. In interviews afterward, he claimed to be constantly aware of being watched by 2 sets of identical eyes. He reported dreams in which he was seated in a wooden chair in darkness, facing another chair, where 2 women sat simultaneously, somehow occupying the same space. In these dreams, they would count down from 7, night after night, the number decreasing with each occurrence. After the 7th dream, Reynolds checked himself into a psychiatric facility. He remains there today, allegedly still haunted by visions of the Thorne sisters and the turning wheel they described. As news of these events spread across social media and alternative news sites, researchers began identifying similar patterns in other locations. All communities with historical connections to cotton production, all experiencing cycles of 7 inexplicable events every 7 years. In each location, the incidents were associated with sightings of identical twin women and references to a turning wheel of judgment. Most significant was the discovery that in each affected community, 7 families could be traced to direct involvement with cotton production during the antebellum period. These families, researchers noted, had experienced disproportionate misfortune over generations, unusual rates of accidents, unexplained deaths, and missing persons. Genealogists made an even more disturbing connection. Many of these families shared common ancestors who had been associated with a plantation in Louisiana called Thornfield. The plantation had been notorious for especially brutal treatment of enslaved workers and had been destroyed in a fire in 1855, 2 years before the Thorne sisters appeared in Coldwater. Historical records of Thornfield were sparse, but one account from a neighboring plantation owner mentioned twin daughters of the owner, who allegedly perished in the fire. Their names were not recorded, but they were described as unusual children, identical in every particular, who spoke seldom but seemed to communicate without words, as if sharing one mind between 2 bodies. This discovery led to a new theory about the Thorne sisters, that they were not supernatural entities, but vengeful spirits of the plantation owner's daughters, seeking retribution against those who had profited from the cotton industry and its dependence on enslaved labor. This theory gained traction in academic circles, with some historians suggesting that the wheel referenced in the sisters' messages represented the cyclical nature of historical justice. Others, particularly those familiar with Wilcox's account, maintained that the entities were something older and more primal, merely using the identities of the Thornfield daughters as vessels. They pointed to the strange preservation of the bodies, the inexplicable powers attributed to the sisters, and the fact that their influence had continued to spread long after their physical forms were discovered and subsequently vanished. Whatever their true nature, as October 27, 2025 approached, the date carved into the chairs discovered in Memphis, communities across the Cotton Belt began taking precautions. Church attendance surged. Sales of salt, iron filings, and protective amulets soared. Many families with historical connections to the cotton industry temporarily relocated, seeking safety and distance. In Coldwater, where the legend began, the tension was particularly acute. The cemetery was cordoned off and placed under 24-hour surveillance. Local authorities, though publicly skeptical, privately implemented security measures throughout the town. Schools and businesses closed. Many residents chose to leave until the date had passed. Those who remained gathered in churches and community centers, drawing comfort from shared vigils. They reminded each other that many such dates had come and gone over the generations, each predicted to be the final turning of the wheel, yet life had continued. As the sun sets today on October 27, 2025, we cannot know what the night will bring. Will the wheel of judgment complete its final turn, as the Thorne sisters have promised? Will those marked for accounting be called to answer for historical sins? Or will the date pass like so many others, the prophecy unfulfilled, or perhaps merely postponed? What we do know is that fear has power. Stories have power. And somewhere in the shadowed intersection between history and legend, between justice and vengeance, the Thorne sisters continue their patient wait, whether as supernatural entities, vengeful spirits, or merely powerful symbols of a reckoning long deferred. In these uncertain hours, as communities across the South keep watch through the night, many have turned to faith for comfort and protection. They remind themselves that light overcomes darkness, that morning always follows even the longest night, and that regardless of what powers may move in the shadows, a higher power watches over all. As the old hymn sung in churches throughout the region tonight proclaims, "Though darkness hide thee, though the eye of sinful man thy glory may not see, only thou art holy. There is none beside thee, perfect in power, in love, and purity." So tonight, wherever you are watching from, whatever shadows may seem to gather at the corners of your vision, remember that you are not alone in the darkness. Keep your lights burning. Hold close to those you love. And perhaps place a little salt across your threshold for tradition's sake, if nothing else. The wheel turns, the circle widens, and the sisters watch, their identical smiles promising that some debts, no matter how long deferred, must eventually be paid. May God bless you, and may Jesus Christ guide your path through whatever darkness you face, tonight and always.